You're listening to Reach, Teach, Talk with Nat Ding.
Welcome back to another episode of Reach, Teach, Talk. I am thrilled today because I have as a guest here on this podcast episode a 45-year teacher who has worked with kindergartners and first graders her entire career here in Los Angeles, California. This is a teacher who I was hoping so badly to get on this show because she could talk about anything that relates to relational teaching, anything that relates to the connection that we all have with each other, the human connection, because she's worked with 5 and 6 year olds, because she is articulate in her own way, because the way her voice speaks is a voice that you would want to have as your kindergarten or first grade teacher. When you look back, when you think of yourself, or you think of your kids, or you think of your grandkids, you will see this, you will hear this for yourselves. Miss Judy Mansfield, 45-year teacher, educator here in Los Angeles, to talk with us today about the concept of trust. And I've always thought to myself, gosh, if you can build trust with 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds, you can build trust with anybody. Trust only takes a long time to build, but it takes only a nanosecond to break. And we're going to be talking about the importance of trust, particularly in this day and age, with this generation rising up, where they're getting information from myriad sources from all over, through technology, through their exposure to media, through their exposure to just the world that seems closer to these little kids than it seemed in previous generations, including my own. And what every kid needs is an atmosphere, a classroom that focuses on building trust through safety, through stability, through the freedom to try things out, to explore, to fail, to bump their head, to skin their knees, to get lost and then be found, and to have this teacher who finds them, who welcomes them back from failure, from injury, from being wounded either in ego or in the mind or in their physical selves, to come back to what Judy Mansfield said when she came into the studio, this classroom as a nest, this classroom as a place that is a haven and a place where kids can grow in an environment that is infused by trust. So without much further ado, welcome Judy Mansfield, 45-year educator of the little ones in elementary school. And we're going to talk today about the power of trust and trust building. So welcome.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me and trusting that I'll do a good job for you, and I certainly hope that I will. When you asked me to do the podcast, it really did make me think of perhaps aspects about myself that I just always taken for granted or thought were there. But it made me think a lot deeper about what have I done in my career and how have I changed the relationship and thinking about trust. When I was a beginning teacher, all I could really do was be 1 day or 3 hours ahead of the children. I couldn't have any energy to really think about much else. Plus, I was really becoming my own person, and I didn't have a lot of time to, when I look back, think about how my actions might affect young children. The more that I matured, the easier it became. But I have some takeaways that I always tried to remember. You know, every one of us, children included, have warts. And with those warts, you know, they will come off if you give it the right treatment. So children are a little bit like that. But one of the things that I always tried to remember is every child has a talent. They may not be athletic, they may not be musical, it might be an emotional kind of talent, and for many you need to dig deeper. The harder you dig and the more you find that special talent, the more a child will begin to know that you really, really like and know them. And that's the bottom line. In order to be like that, you have to make yourself very vulnerable. And you have to admit, boy, I really screwed up on that. I really made a bad choice for that child. You have to know yourself and be willing to say, I didn't do a good job today handling that situation. But knowing that you can go back the next day, take that child aside and apologize for the way you handled that and get them more involved in it. The other thing that is that is really very important, and I hold deeply, not only with children, but with adults. Everyone wants to be accepted and loved. And many children, even young, have a facade that covers up that it doesn't matter to them, or it does. Once you peel that away and find out who the real person and the real soul that is in that child, you've got them. But it may not happen in September. It may not happen in October. And I will admit, some of them are harder to get to and to love than others. But stay with it, and you will find something to love and to cherish, and then that child will trust you.
Every single child you've ever taught, then, you have found something deep within, and sometimes deeper for some than for others. Some of them are tougher nuts to crack than others.
They are. And the other thing is that when I know them at ages 5 and 6, you really know who they are deep down. And then I look at them perhaps when they come back, and they've got all of these other clothing layers on them. But if you talk to them on a one-to-one, they're the same. They still want to be loved, accepted, and know that you remember them for who they were.
This talk about the spirit and the soul of a child is something, in living in London, the Ofsted, which is the kind of the equivalent of the Department of Education here in the U.S., I was struck by, I'm on the board of of a school in London, which is a primary school, and they really actually have a whole section of evaluation when they come in to evaluate these schools on their 2-day walkthroughs, which looks at the spiritual life of the child. How well is this school developing the spiritual life of a child? And it took me a little while to wrap my hands around that, the idea that this is not talking about formal, organized religion. It's not even talking about spirituality, but it's talking about spirit. Can you speak to that a little bit? And where do you think we are today in terms of schools in the U.S. and focusing on the spirit?
In many ways, I think we're losing that. And I don't know if that is just, for me, a generational thing, thinking back how it was when I first began or my upbringing. But students today are very busy, very competitive, because all their parents and they want to get in a good school to have a, quote, successful life. Sometimes, if that is your main focus, it is easy to lose who you really are and what makes you happy. And even, young children, you don't know what their path is going to be or whatever. But you do know that if you give them the tools of love and trust, and for me that's a part of spirituality, if you give that to them and know no matter what their path is, you trust them to make good choices. And that takes a lot of work for a teacher. They're going to make horribly bad mistakes, just like I continue to do today. But with each of those mistakes that they make, they're going to learn to make a better choice, or to at least think a nanosecond before they do the same thing again. And for me, teaching is all about raising and rearing good human beings for society. And, I look at children that I've had that had either emotional issues, academic issues, and were labeled according to some sort of label. Well, in each of those labelings, whether it may medically be true or not, there's a way for them to use that for later success. I'm thinking about students that I've had that were diagnosed of, ADHD. They might be they may be difficult in the classroom, but you fast forward that 20 years, and that energy and that enthusiasm and that focus. You look at those children, and if nothing else has gotten in their way, they are doing well, and they are not in-the-box thinkers. And I think, along with that trust, you've got to just get over that every child is supposed to be the same. And you just know every morning somebody is going to jerk your chain, and you just have to hold yourself back and say, okay, let me think about how I'm going to deal with that. It may be absolutely private. It may be just a look. And a look and a voice will get you every time.
A look and a voice. And sometimes the look even supersedes the voice.
Yes.
Right? Sometimes words take a back seat to actual tone or that look. I think all of us can think of a teacher who gave us that look at some point growing up, and we remember it today. Still causes a shudder. Right? Time. It takes time. It takes time to build trust. And if you break it down, it takes time to take that breath that a relational teacher like yourself would have to do when that student is yanking your chain, right? So what advice could you give to teachers on their messages to themselves when they have a student, it's the rush of the classroom, who needs something from you?
I think one of the first things is if you feel that heat or that hair on the back of your neck, or you want to say something, just put your hand over your mouth and be quiet. Don't say the first thing that comes out of your mouth. Turn around so they don't see you. Take a breath. Know that there's some defense that kid is doing. I don't know. Maybe they talk to their parents like that. Maybe they talk to their child care person. That doesn't mean that it's going to be all right with you and you let it slide. But now would not be the time to do that. So you just have to sometimes put your own ego way off the shelf and say, who am I serving now? Am I serving myself or am I serving this child? And once you do that, and once they have cooled off, you have cooled off, then you can have a private talk with saying, I think there's something, let's chat. There's something we need to talk about. And they have to look you in the eye. If they don't look you in the eye, they will come up with all kinds of, frankly, BS. And if they look you in the eye, they have to be honest. And if you have eye communication, you just know something about a person's eyes. You can tell when you've got them. And it might take several times for that child. The same thing actually works with parents. It's just as difficult to get trust and have trust of a parent, sometimes harder than it is from a child. I think parenting is one of the most difficult jobs in the whole world, and no one really can tell a parent how to parent other than give them advice. But I think parenting, especially now with parents, is very difficult.
What do you think is the factor that makes you say, especially now? Is there one thing you were thinking about?
I think in the words in your introduction, like social media, they have access to so much material, and some accurate, some not accurate. If their lives are busy, they may not have time to really sit and chat with their child to find out. And then, they have their own expectations and ego wrapped up in their children. The interesting thing that I found is I did a much better job parenting the older I got. If I had parents that were close to my age, well, how would they take any advice that I gave them? How would I really have enough experience to be respected in that way for them? But I noticed the older I got, the more they respected my opinion, and I also think it is because I took a serious look at who I was and how I was dealing with them. But as long as the parent knows that you really know their child and you're really working for that child and you want to work with them, it's an easier road.
I'm thinking a lot about sight and the eyes.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier about the eyes being the window to the soul. You mentioned the eye contact being something so much more than just paying attention. You can read somebody through their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And you also said that about the parents, the kids and the parents. And I thought about how you can always see, it's amazing how from far away you can tell if somebody's looking at you or not. Even though you can't see their eyes necessarily, you really can. So we have this gift as human beings, right? We have this gift of sight. And the idea of hindsight is something that came to mind just a moment ago. When you're talking about working with parents and when you're around their age or when you're younger yourself, it takes a lot longer. It's not impossible. You've achieved it. It's to build that trust with parents who are very close to your age. You're young, they're young. But it's hindsight that can help and be so advantageous to teachers. And I think about that, and you actually helped me clarify this, because I think people who go into teaching as a career change have a certain advantage. Do you, because they're coming in as adults, they're coming in as, they've got hindsight. They've been young. They've been young adults. They've, had a career. They've scraped, years together of parenting, and now they want to go into the classroom. And they've got the gift of hindsight, which some others might call wisdom. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
I totally agree that is, I think, a major plus. Plus, sometimes when you get older, you I hope become a bit more mellow, but we know people that have not become more mellow; they've become the other way. But
we leave politics out of the discussion here.
we hope that that we become more compassionate and more mellow and more understanding of. Everybody has their own way, and that doesn't mean that it's the wrong way. But I do think the other thing that I don't quite know how to exactly pinpoint it is that no matter who the teacher is or the administrator or whatever, if you allow your ego to get in the way of all of those things, I think you've lost the battle. And it's a hard thing to kind of separate. Okay, is this my ego, or is this the right way? It's a tough call, but I think, if you're egotistic, I don't believe teaching is quite the right place for you.
And not only, that's genius and absolutely true. And not only are you saying that, but you actually gave examples of that when we started this conversation. It was really interesting to me because everything you said about working with kids and how to build the trust bridge with 5 and 6 year olds involved vulnerability. You started with the word apologies. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, we have to get back to this at some point. This is a perfect time to do this because all of that involves removing the ego from your relationship with your students. And they're 5 years old, Judy.
Yes.
But even with 5-year-olds, you're saying, to communicate that to err as human is really important. Can you speak a little more to that? How do you view 5-year-olds then? Are they little adults?
I view them in knowing innately by your daily actions, and actions not only just to them, but they watch how you're treating others. They know if you have favorites. A child knows if you really like them, or if you're putting on a persona in front of others, showing that you care and all the, lovey-dovey stuff. It's deeper than that. But a child knows if you've really got their back, and that you would have it their whole life. Children that I had 40 years ago, I still think of them and will never, ever forget them. I think, and then if I see them as an adult, oh my gosh, I still see them sitting on the rug, sitting and playing and goofballing at recess, because I think deep down that's still who they are. So I really did have to learn to apologize. Well, first of all, I had to realize that there was something that I had to apologize for. And then knowing, what is the big? You goofed up, they goof up, let them know that you're exactly like they are, and that you made a wrong decision and you're sorry for it and you're going to do better.
Do you have are you thinking of a specific situation? Is there a story?
There is one that comes to my mind. There was a young boy that was very self-conscious, such a wonderful student, and has many qualities, but never liked to be in the forefront. And I remember he did something, I don't remember exactly what it was, but he did something that was exceptional. And I made attention to that in front of the whole room. And I knew instantly by looking at his face that I had made a big faux pas. He did not want others knowing how successful he was, because perhaps one of his friends could not do it. And I had to take him aside, and I deeply apologized for embarrassing him. But I looked at his face, and I knew instantly that that was not the right thing for him. Now, another child would have been glorious in that, but not for him. And I remember apologizing for the embarrassment that I caused him.
You shone a spotlight on somebody, on one of your students, publicly, that he deserved. You know, if the intention was correct and true. Yet, as you were giving praise to this student in front of his class, as you were doing it, you realized, oh wait, because you saw his eyes.
I saw his eyes.
And his eyes had a look of, oh no, I'm being
like betrayal.
singled out.
Betrayal, really.
Exactly. Do you remember what you said to him?
I remember calling it exactly what it was, apologizing for how I embarrassed him in front of the class, and I should have known that that was not the right way to handle it. I praised him on the job that he did, and that he should feel good about it. But I should have handled it just quietly between you and I, or maybe written you a little note and stuck it in your homework folder. And he was forever grateful of that. He had tears in his eyes that I knew him well enough, and this was age 6, that I knew him well enough that he felt betrayed because I opened my mouth.
The action, I mean, we're not laughing, obviously, at the situation, but it's the action of opening your mouth that about him. And betrayal is such a strong word, but it's totally appropriate, right? Because to a 6-year-old who had built this trust bridge, and trust is about belief. She believes in me. It's about knowing, as you were saying at the beginning of this conversation as well, it can take months and months to
Yes.
truly know a kid, but that is our primary job.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought Miss Mansfield knew me. Why would she bring up, even if it's positive, why would she highlight me? And listen to her response. I know how that must have made you feel. I'm sorry. And if I had done it again, I would do it with a note or I would do it privately. And his tears, how would you describe those tears then?
Well, I think they were like tears of relief that he didn't have to, that he could hold, I hope, the same opinion and view of me that he had before. And the relief, I think, of realizing that I really did know him. So that was my take on it. I never really asked him, but that was what I garnered from his tears, that they were tears of relief, that, whew, that's over.
And I think that your empathy, the depth of your empathy for this 6-year-old is a great example of the removal of ego and the only adult in the room, or one of the two, if you had an associate teacher in the room, you are the adult. They are, as you said, watching you all the time.
Yes.
And we mentioned earlier about, there's words, but there's tone, there's body language, there's eye contact or looks, a certain look, right? Yes, exactly. We know. We've used those. Sometimes it's all it takes.
Yes.
But and it's so funny because sometimes you can reflect on a look at 2 a.m. and be like, oh man, I looked at that kid and too stern, too severe, and just a look, but it can be so powerful. But most powerful of all is, and most wise of all, I think, is your comment about how he felt a sense of betrayal, and also a sense of relief not just in the apology, but relief that his view of you, that takes a long time to build, especially when it's a trusting view, relief that it's unchanged. It may have rocked a little bit. It might have been a little, 5.4 Richter scale, but it calmed down and it actually maybe even became more solid afterwards.
While you were saying that, it made me also reflect on instances where I've had to really suck it up and apologize to the whole class for maybe misjudging them or only seeing, how teachers sometimes see the last thing that happens and not the first instances that led up to that happening. And I know there have been many instances that I have had to apologize as a whole to the whole class for only seeing one instant and judging the whole thing by it and maybe giving them, quote, the talk.
Explain the talk.
Oh, my
What is
God.
the talk? I got a shiver in my spine when you said that.
Well, it's kind of like, when you goofed up at home, I would rather have had a paddling anytime than the talk from my mother. Like, I thought you would do a better job. I'm so disappointed. Oh, my God. That was the worst. And that's kind of the same thing with children. But being sincere, of course, in, like, you are disappointed in them. That doesn't mean you don't love them and that they're going to have another chance. But, maybe I was grumpy. Maybe I, had a bad night the night before. It didn't feel well and, was harsh or judgmental. But it's important, I think, that when you know you're doing that and when you know that it's not the right way, to say, gee, I am so sorry. I took it out on you and other things, or I didn't see the whole instant. But I don't think there have been many instances that I have not regretted, having the class talk and everybody on the rug and us talking about, somebody's feelings got hurt. And nobody stepped up to help that child. None of you stepped up. And going through what are the steps to step up. And, if you start that with 6-year-olds especially, they will have a friend that will step up to help them when everybody else is picking on them or maybe they don't fit in with whoever the in crowd is. I do not regret having those honest, firm talks about treating other people and how they should be respectful of others. I don't regret any of those talks.
Not one bit, because you're working with kids at the foundational level here, and whatever you see, you're also the observer here. And you're up there observing these 20 kids or 16 to 20 kids in the classroom as a unit too. And every once in a while, it's really important. And sometimes, I mean, I'm curious, do you also share with the class when the class is done exceptionally well?
Yes, and pride them on, if I saw an incident, perhaps at recess or checkout or any time, and I saw somebody else helping somebody else that maybe somebody was picking on, or maybe they had a bad experience at home, I really will, as a class, say, this is the kind of thing that we mean about being a good friend. And so, yeah, and your point is good in the fact that it does make me want to talk about, it's easy to go to the negative sometime, and not enough to make conscious effort to praise the class a couple of times for legitimate, not made up things, but legitimate times that they really have arisen to the occasion.
And we need to look for those legitimate times.
Yes.
Because we can't just throw out artificial balloons at them and be like, you're just wonderful for breathing. Look at how cute you look sitting there. You're wonderful. That's false praise. And you said earlier, this is just repeating back to you, it's the kids know. They know.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They know better than adults.
Well, you remember, at school when, those gold slips that we would get for positive behavior.
Oh, yeah, we had this, yeah.
I know I've had many children, pick up a piece of litter and say, "Don't I deserve a gold slip?" It's about all I could do, just not to laugh. But they finally get the message. That's just part of their daily responsibility about pride and where they go to school or their own home or whatever. But I mean, they give it a shot. It's worth a try.
It's worth a try. The conditional if-then.
Yes.
It's prodigal son. I stayed here and I was good. My brother went away and partied, and then he comes back and you welcome him back? Wait, What about me? Didn't I deserve your love? This is wonderful. I'm going to actually take a moment, because you're in hearing you talk about the classroom. I did a little bit of polling with some people who absolutely love you and had you, and parents whose kids have had you as their teachers. And then one of these stands out. I'm just going to read one. This is a woman who had two daughters go through your classes.
Oh, I'll see if I can figure out who it is.
Yes, yeah, we'll see. I bet you can, but you don't have to say it on the. Miss Mansfield continues to be a favorite in our household, even though it was so many years ago. She was our first grade teacher. She created a safe space in her class where they secretly chewed bubble gum in class on special occasions. They earned popcorn parties for being very good and following what we called the 5 C's character. They had the annual sleepover to show the kids how much they grew. Miss Mansfield instilled an independence in my daughters and provided chances to be thinkers. She had them create lists of things that they excel in so that they could go to each other for expertise.
I'd forgotten it. I'd done that, yes.
One of my girls recalls that rather than starting her morning in the early care, where kids can be early dropped off into your school, Mrs. Mansfield let my daughter rearrange desks and choose new tables for her classmates. She loved the responsibility that Mrs. Mansfield provided her. My other daughter always remembers the different roles and jobs that she had in first grade. Both of my daughters remember feeling loved, and they knew that Judy Mansfield believed in them, and that was a feeling that they still feel today.
Oh, that is wonderful.
And
not just, that somebody really said that is quite a lovely thing. Sometimes you just take those things for granted. And I really appreciate that.
Teaching feels sometimes like anonymous donations, right? It's like you're giving and you know, we're mature, we know, right? It's not going to come back to us as oh, I remember that day when it was that March day when I was 6 years old, and you got down on your knees and you just told me this thing that just changed my whole self-concept, and since that moment I've grown. You'll never really don't hear that, but you have to have faith, and you have to have that intuition that says there are tens of thousands, right, of kids who you have worked with. Maybe not. I mean, that's a lot of less than that, but still, if you calculate it, math was never my forte. Hundreds to thousands of kids that you have had as your students who would all have stories like that and feelings of love because you communicated feelings of love to them. And I love this secrecy. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit, because there's something so special about that. Like, this is our secret world here. We have our secret rules here.
Well, more toward the end of the year, after you really had bonded, I always thought it was special to have something that was just ours, whether it was, a popcorn party, or I just loved that bubblegum party because there was no chewing of gum at school.
No.
And it was, for many of them, the first time that they had ever chewed bubble gum, and we had to give lessons then on how do you blow a bubble. And there were some in the class who really were quite dynamic about how to where to put your tongue and when to blow the right pressure. And I thought, I just blow bubbles, bubble gum whenever I wanted to. I never thought about how to do it. But there were some students who were helping others, and even if they got their tongue in the tip of that gum, we call that a bubble. So it just silly things like that. Sometimes it would, be the desk fairy that came if they had a clean desk, and maybe a little treat of some sort, or a little paper cutout of their favorite animal or something if their desk was clean from the desk fairy. Just something that was special that only our class did to make us like a family unit, that like a tradition, families always have traditions. The other thing that I'm just thinking about, in all of the total 50 years that I taught, I cannot think of one child that I ever did not like.
Truly.
Not one child. There were, like we said, there were ones that I had to work harder to break down the facade of who they were. But I can't think of a single child. Some I felt sorry for. Some I wanted to take home. But there was not one that I ever thought, I don't like you. Mm-hmm.
In 50 years of teaching,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that speaks volumes about belief that every single one of us has something likable,
Mm-hmm.
something lovable,
Mm-hmm.
and that the love of a teacher, the unconditional love of a teacher, is the most important thing.
I believe that. I do. They'll succeed if you give them that. They'll succeed in whatever their role is. And, life has to have people have to have different roles. They all can't be a CEO. Somebody in there has to be caring for others, has to, be able to be good with their hands. Heavens, if somebody told me I had to be a plumber and learn plumbing or an electrician, I would be the worst in the world. I have no talent for that.
We're going to have to wrap this up,
Okay.
but I was just thinking about talents outside of the classroom, and it made me think about something else I know about you, which is you really take advantage of your off-teaching time. Can you speak a little bit about that and what is so important to you about honoring your love of travel and your love of exploration?
I do love to travel. Most of my travel right now, since I'm physically still able to hike a lot and walk, is based around adventure travel, where I have to really exert myself and go to the beyond. But it's also about what animal lives there. I really only travel to areas now that have animals that I'm not sure are going to be around in 20 or 30 years. The place is wonderful, and I love the places, but for me it's about what is the animal that lives there, because when you look, animals and children are very much alike. If you treat them with, other than like wild animals, but if you treat them with respect, and there's still something in an animal's eye when you get close that is very much like a child's, in trust and love. And I know that sounds so bizarre, and so many people will think, oh man, she has really lost it. But I really have a love of animals and conservation, and every living thing has a place in our world. And so like I just got back from China and going in the mountains, the Shin Mountains, and I went up 13,000 feet, and man, I thought my heart was going to leap out of my chest before I got there. But I thought, Judy, you've come all this way. You're not giving up. So I really just love traveling and meeting all kinds of people and cultures, and knowing, just because I'm a U.S. citizen does not make me a better person than somebody from another country.
And just because I come from this kind of a family doesn't make me a better kid than somebody who comes from a different type of family.
Yes.
Right? I mean, that is applicable.
So true. Material things do not make true happiness.
Yet the eyes have it. The eyes are the windows to the soul. The eyes are the greatest communicators of connection and of trust. And the averted gaze is something that, whether it's the averted gaze to the iPhone or whether it's the just looking away, is something that Miss Mansfield has paid attention to and brought them back into the eyesight, the connection, and the removing of the letter I, right?
Yes.
Of the ego, allowing the vulnerability, allowing time to reflect as a teacher, time to apologize when necessary, time to show the students that you see them. I see you. I trust you. That's at the end of the day, that is what creates the classroom experience of love that is felt by your students years and years afterwards. I just want to thank you so much for being on this episode, Judy Mansfield.
You gave me lots of things to think about and experiences that I had forgotten. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Your wisdom and your love is just amazing. Thank you so much, Judy.
Thank you.